I remember the day I decided to see the truth for myself. It was a cold Monday morning in late fall, and the wind whipping through the streets of Cleveland felt more unforgiving than usual. I'm Richard Barker, founder and CEO of Sunshine Brew, a small chain of cafes I began nearly a decade ago. We started as a cozy corner coffee shop, brightening the mornings of folks in my neighborhood, but we've since grown into a dozen locations scattered around Ohio. Our mission statement has always been simple: serve great coffee with warmth and empathy. Yet the latest reports on one particular cafe indicated my ideals weren't shining through anymore. I had heard rumors of declining morale. The complaints from both customers and employees seemed unending. There were stories of rude service, impatient managers, and an overall tension that had nothing to do with the usual hustle of a busy cafe. Revenue had dropped, and the negativity felt like a dark cloud looming over everything we once stood for. I tried confronting my district manager about it, but she insisted it was merely a bad streak, that staff were just adjusting to new protocols. However, a friend of mine mentioned a humiliating incident with a disabled patron at the same cafe. He didn't share many details, but his tone told me enough. I knew I couldn't sit behind my desk, reading sanitized reports. I had to step in and see firsthand what my customers and employees were really experiencing. That Monday, I picked the location known as Sunshine Brew on Lambert Street, a busy avenue near downtown. I dressed in faded jeans, a cheap windbreaker, and a worn baseball cap. Usually I'm in a tailored suit, but I needed to blend into the crowd this time. I parked my car a few blocks away, letting the brisk air invigorate me. My breath came out in little puffs, matching the swirl of my unease. As I approached the cafe, I could tell from the outside that it was understaffed. A line had formed at the counter, and two patrons were pacing near the entrance, checking their watches with frustration. The large windows displayed a bustling interior where staff scrambled behind the counter. The setup was the same cheerful design we prided ourselves on: bright sun-themed murals and big windows for natural light. Yet the mood inside felt off. I could almost sense the tension seeping through the glass. I forced myself to smile politely when I pulled the door open. The smell of roasted coffee and a hint of fresh muffins greeted me. But so did an unmistakable aura of stress. A middle-aged woman stood behind the register, rushing through orders as fast as her voice could manage. There was an older man at a side table, tapping his cane on the floor in a jittery pattern. It looked like he'd been waiting longer than he should have. My heart clenched when I noticed the slight tremor in his hands. A barista in a wrinkled apron dashed by, nearly colliding with me. "Sorry," she mumbled, not making eye contact, her face etched with fatigue. I found a vacant table in the corner, next to a display of pastries. From that vantage point, I could see the entire cafe. I sat there, fiddling with my phone, eavesdropping on the hum of conversation. A few minutes passed before anyone acknowledged me. Finally, a cheerful but overwhelmed barista named Ella emerged from behind the counter, carrying a small pad. She had short blonde hair pinned back under a cap, and there was a noticeable flush across her cheeks, perhaps from hustling nonstop. "Welcome to Sunshine Brew. What can I get started for you?" she asked in a breathy tone. I glanced up with a tentative grin. "Just a black coffee, medium, please." She nodded and scribbled on her pad, forcing a friendly smile, though her eyes seemed shadowed by long hours. While she retreated to prepare my drink, I noticed the manager I'd come to investigate. A tall, stern-faced man, probably in his late 40s, hovered by the espresso machines. I recognized him from a staff meeting months prior. Craig Davis. He had come with glowing references, touting efficient cost management. Now, as I observed him, I saw an entirely different side. He barked orders at a new hire, fumbling with the cappuccino machine. "Quicker, Macy, we're backed up," he said, raising his voice above the background noise. Macy, a timid girl, nearly spilled steamed milk in her haste. An uneasy feeling settled over me. That wasn't how we trained our managers to behave. Our philosophy stressed patience and camaraderie, which seemed entirely absent here. When Ella returned with my coffee, she looked tense. "Sorry for the wait, we're running short-staffed today." I thanked her, then inquired about the cafe's typical days. She hesitated, as if unsure she should confide in a total stranger. but perhaps she saw something in my expression that suggested concern. "It's been rough," she confessed quietly. "We used to have more people on shift, but corporate cut hours, so now it's just us, trying to hold everything together." I felt a pang of guilt. I'd signed off on budget adjustments after reading managerial recommendations, trusting that customer experience wouldn't be affected. "Is your manager helpful?" I ventured, trying to sound casual. Ella cast a quick glance toward Craig, who was berating poor Macy for messing up another cappuccino. She lowered her voice. "He's stressed, I get it, but sometimes he can be—" She paused, searching for a polite word. "Intimidating." I nodded in sympathy. The lines at the counter had shortened, but folks were now waiting for their drinks in a tight knot near the pickup area. Mugs clinked, an espresso machine hissed, and frustration mingled in the air like a bitter aftertaste. Then I noticed the older man with the cane tapping away near the sugar station. He seemed anxious, occasionally shifting his weight from one foot to the other. I sipped my coffee, deciding to hang around until something more substantial surfaced. A while later, as the lunch crowd approached, an electric wheelchair eased through the front door. A young man named Dylan maneuvered it carefully, searching for a spot free from traffic. Ella rushed to greet him. He had visited this cafe before, that much was obvious from the way she smiled softly at him. He attempted to place his order, but the cafe had grown louder, so she leaned closer, scribbling his request. Her gentle demeanor struck me as admirable. It was precisely the brand of kindness Sunshine Brew was meant to embody. Meanwhile, Craig hovered nearby, scanning the room like a hawk. Then it happened. A minor incident that spiraled into something far uglier. Dylan rolled toward the counter to grab a straw, but a stray backpack blocked his path. He tried nudging it aside with his chair, looking slightly embarrassed, as if worried about inconveniencing anyone. He seemed to be struggling, and a few people looked over, uncertain whether to assist. Suddenly the manager walked up. "Need help?" he demanded, but the way he said it carried a layer of impatience. Dylan offered a nervous half-smile. "I'm okay, just trying to reach the straw dispenser." Craig exhaled. I swear I heard the frustration in his breath. He grabbed the backpack off the floor with a huff, then turned to Dylan. "Next time, watch where you're going. We don't have time to rearrange the cafe for every random request." That remark echoed in my ears, making me stiffen. Random request? Dylan glanced at him with wounded confusion, and a couple of customers paused, sensing the tension. Ella froze behind the counter, exchanging a horrified look with Macy. My blood ran cold at the sight. I pushed my chair back, about to intervene, but I forced myself to remain calm, to witness the full scope of Craig's behavior. If I was going to correct this, I needed to understand the depth of the problem. Dylan's voice trembled when he replied, I'm sorry, I just needed a straw." Craig responded with a dismissive shrug. "Fine, just hurry up next time, okay? We're busy." Those words were like nails scraping my heart. How could he speak that way to anyone, especially a patron with mobility challenges? My vision narrowed. I wanted to reveal myself, to put an immediate end to this arrogance. Instead, I inhaled slowly, trying to keep my cover a bit longer. I rose from my table and walked up to Dylan, offering to push the dispenser closer. "Here you go," I said quietly, handing him a straw and shooting him an apologetic look. He thanked me, cheeks flushed with embarrassment. The entire exchange seemed humiliating for him. Craig was already marching over to Macy, muttering something about incompetent baristas. Ella caught my eye, as if to gauge my reaction. There was a flicker of relief in her gaze, perhaps because she sensed I found Craig's behavior unacceptable. I gave her a small nod and returned to my seat, though my heart was thumping. That moment confirmed everything I feared. We had a manager who saw customers as inconveniences rather than people. For the next half hour, I observed more alarming details. The staff appeared frightened of Craig, scurrying the moment he barked instructions. The disabled man, Dylan, sipped his coffee in the corner, quietly scanning his phone, though he looked like he wanted to shrink away from the entire place. My mind churned with anger and sadness at once. This wasn't the environment I had envisioned when I launched Sunshine Brew with the slogan "A ray of warmth in every cup." We were failing that promise. right here, in broad daylight. I decided it was time to act. I removed my baseball cap and approached the front counter, adopting a soft tone. "Excuse me," I said to Ella, "is the manager available?" She gave me a wary look, as if concerned I might lodge a complaint, but she nodded. "Sure, I can get him for you." She scurried off to the back, while I waited with my arms folded over my chest, summoning patience. A few customers eyed me curiously, sensing tension. Craig emerged, still wearing that stern expression. "Yes, can I help you?" he asked, glancing at me like I was yet another problem. I took a deep breath. "I just wanted to let you know the place is quite busy and a few customers, including myself, are noticing the staff seem overwhelmed." Craig shrugged, crossing his arms defensively. "We're short-handed, and I don't exactly have a magic wand to fix it. If you've got a complaint, you can submit it online." I swallowed the retort forming on my tongue. Instead, I forced a neutral tone. "What about the gentleman in the wheelchair? It seemed like he could have used a little kindness." Craig's gaze hardened. He lowered his voice. "Look, buddy, we don't have time to cater to every special need. We get slammed during lunch, and that's just how it goes. If people can't handle it, maybe they should find somewhere else." I felt my blood pressure spike. It took every ounce of self-restraint not to reveal my identity on the spot, but I had planned to observe over multiple days, to gather enough evidence so no one would spin it as a misunderstanding. Instead, I politely thanked him for his time and left the cafe. My next move was to call Leah, my executive assistant, from my car. "Leah," I said, voice trembling with frustration, "clear my calendar for the rest of the week. I need to go undercover again at the Lambert Street Cafe. This place is out of control." She hesitated for a moment. "Is everything okay?" I told her just enough to convey the seriousness, then hung up. My mind replayed Dylan's expression, the way Craig dismissed him. I knew I had to fix this, not only for that customer's sake, but also for the entire business I loved. The following day I returned, wearing a different outfit, a dark hoodie, older sneakers, and no cap this time. I came in earlier, wanting to watch the opening shift. Macy was trying to set up the pastry display while juggling coffee orders. Ella looked equally frazzled, her eyes kept darting to the front door, likely expecting Craig to barge in. A few minutes later he did. He stepped behind the counter, scanned the room, and frowned. "This place is a mess already," he announced, dropping his keys on the counter. "Where's the new shipment? We're missing half the pastries." Macy stammered an apology, explaining that the delivery truck was late. Craig pointed a finger, hissing that she should have planned better. When she lowered her head, I saw tears welling in her eyes. That was it. I couldn't watch him belittle people anymore. My jaw clenched as I sidled up to the bar, acting like a curious customer. "What's wrong with the delivery?" I asked gently, feigning ignorance. Macy mumbled something about traffic issues, keeping her eyes cast downward. Craig turned to me with an exasperated glare. "And who are you?" he spat, clearly irritated that I was intruding on his domain. "Just someone who enjoys a good coffee in the morning," I replied calmly. "Seems a little tense in here. Is everything all right?" He let out a dry laugh. "We're short-staffed, we're behind schedule, and now we've got random people giving opinions. Everything's perfect." His sarcasm dripped with contempt, but I gave him a measured nod. "Sounds like you could use an extra set of hands." I half expected him to dismiss me again, yet he eyed me for a moment. Perhaps he saw an opportunity to exploit someone's willingness to help. "Fine," he said, slapping a spare apron onto the counter. "You want to volunteer for some free coffee? Knock yourself out. Just stay out of my way." Ella looked stunned, but relief flickered across her face. In less than 5 minutes, I found myself behind the counter assisting with simple tasks, refilling pastry trays, stocking napkins, wiping down tables. It felt surreal to be in my own cafe, disguised as a spontaneous helper. My heart pounded at the risk. If anyone recognized me, the jig would be up, but the staff was too harried to notice anything unusual. The whole morning, I listened to Craig's scathing remarks. If someone spilled milk, he'd bark that they were wasting resources. If an order took too long, he'd snap at them to move faster. The tension was palpable. Around 11, a familiar face reappeared. Dylan, the man in the wheelchair from the day before. He maneuvered toward the counter and I overheard him quietly asking Ella about a seasonal drink. She smiled politely, but her voice wavered. Right then, a swarm of new customers entered. The line ballooned. Craig stormed out of the back room, scanning the crowd, clearly irritated by the lunchtime rush. He spotted Dylan and rolled his eyes. I braced myself for another nasty interaction. Dylan finished placing his order, then politely asked if someone could help set aside a table so he could fit his wheelchair more comfortably. Ella nodded, but Craig strode over, speaking loudly enough for half the cafe to hear. "Look, we can't keep rearranging furniture every time someone wants special treatment. We've got a line of people waiting. Maybe you could just take whatever seat is open." I heard the trembling in Dylan's voice as he tried to explain that it was difficult maneuvering in tight spaces. Craig cut him off with a dismissive hand gesture. "Then maybe you shouldn't come at the busiest hour. We're not running a personal service here." My mind blanked for an instant, overridden by fury. This had gone from inconsiderate to outright cruel. Several customers turned their heads and Macy nearly dropped the pitcher she was carrying. Dylan looked mortified, his cheeks burning a deep red. That was my breaking point. No more notes, no more quiet observation. I stepped between them, turning to face Craig. "Apologize," I said, voice low, my jaw set. He glared at me, baffled by my sudden boldness. "Excuse me?" "Apologize to him," I repeated, my tone even firmer. "He's a customer who needs a little consideration. It's basic decency." Craig laughed harshly. "And who exactly do you think you are, telling me how to run my cafe?" I took a slow breath. Every eye in the room was on us. I reached up, pulled off the apron and let it drop onto the counter. "I'm Richard Barker," I said, projecting my voice so there was no confusion. "Founder and CEO of Sunshine Brew. This isn't just any cafe, it's mine, and you're done insulting people in it." The cafe fell into a stunned hush. Ella's mouth parted in shock. Macy looked too stunned to speak. Dylan blinked rapidly, trying to process what was happening. Craig's face turned an alarming shade of crimson. He opened his mouth, then closed it, as if searching for a defense. "That's not possible," he sputtered. I pulled out my wallet and flipped it open, revealing my identification card from corporate. "Believe it," I said quietly, my voice shaking with anger. For a moment, he just stood there, as if his entire world had collapsed. Then he started stammering excuses. I've been under pressure to raise revenue. We're understaffed, we don't have the resources." I cut him off, leveling him with a steady glare. "That's no excuse for cruelty. I built this company to serve customers with dignity. I expected managers to lead with empathy. You've turned this place into a nightmare, and I won't allow it." Dylan, still near the counter, was watching me with a mix of gratitude and disbelief. I turned to him and spoke gently. "I'm so sorry for how you've been treated. You deserve better, and you will be treated better from now on." His eyes glistened with relief, and he nodded, not trusting his voice to remain steady. Craig tried to salvage the situation, mumbling something about how he could change, how he'd do better, but I shook my head. "You've shown me exactly who you are, no second chances." My words rang with finality. He looked around, possibly searching for any ally, but the staff had retreated. Even the customers kept their distance. With a trembling breath, he yanked off his name badge and dropped it onto the counter. Then he stormed out the front door, letting in a gust of cold air behind him. I stood there for a few seconds, heart pounding, until someone in the cafe began clapping. A few others joined in, hesitant at first, then more boldly. It wasn't a celebration of drama, it was relief that the hostility had ended. I exhaled, turning to the shaken staff. "Thank you everyone for staying strong," I said, my voice uneven with emotion. "I promise we will fix this." Ella approached, tears threatening to spill down her cheeks. "I never realized you were the owner," she whispered, almost apologetic. I offered a tired but comforting smile. "You had no reason to recognize me. That's why I came undercover. I needed to see the problems without any facade." That afternoon, I gathered everyone in the back room after the cafe closed early. I apologized for the abrupt schedule change, but they seemed relieved to have a moment of peace. Dylan stayed too, curious about what changes might arise. The staff formed a small circle, letting me take the lead. I built Sunshine Brew with the intention of creating a home away from home, I began, voice tight with guilt. Clearly, that vision got lost. I'm sorry you've all had to endure this. Effective immediately, I'm hiring additional baristas and a new manager who understands our values. No one should feel scared at work, and no customer should feel disrespected. I turned to Dylan. If you're comfortable sharing your experience, I'd like to understand how we can better accommodate customers with mobility challenges. Maybe we can rearrange the layout, offer designated spaces, train staff on how to help without patronizing you. Whatever we do, it should be respectful. He offered a relieved grin, nodding as he described small changes that would improve accessibility. Ella chimed in, suggesting we designate a specific section of the cafe with wider spacing. We spoke late into the evening. I wrote down every concern. By the time we stepped outside, the sun had dipped below the skyline, painting the horizon in fiery shades of orange. The staff looked hopeful for the first time, and even the new hires appeared less nervous. I reminded them that change wouldn't happen overnight, but I promised them forward momentum. In the days that followed, I oversaw the cafe's transformation. We hired 2 additional baristas, rearranged the seating to include comfortable pathways, and brought in a manager named Heather, who had previously worked in an assisted living facility and radiated empathy. The atmosphere shifted dramatically. Customers who'd boycotted the place came back to find a renewed sense of warmth. Dylan dropped by one afternoon and smiled at the new layout, giving me a thumbs up from across the cafe. I felt genuine pride swell in my chest. We were on the right track. Before I finally stepped away from daily oversight, I hosted a small meeting with the entire Lambert Street staff. I publicly praised Ella and Macy for their resilience. I apologized for being absent so long that the cafe turned into a toxic environment. There were tears, laughter, and heartfelt gratitude all around. I made sure everyone knew that corporate would cover them if they ever encountered harassment again. "Speak up," I urged, placing a hand on Ella's shoulder. "We can't fix what we don't know." Now, as I look back on that week, I still feel a jolt of anger remembering the callous remarks Craig made. But I also feel relief. In a way, his behavior forced me to confront how my leadership had become distant. I forgot that the heart of a business isn't the spreadsheets. It's the people who pour their sweat into each cup of coffee, and the customers who trust us to treat them with respect. By going undercover, I rediscovered our original mission. I left the Lambert Street Cafe with a sense of renewed purpose. The sign that once read Sunshine Brew under a swirling sun decal felt like it sparkled again. I know it's just a logo, but in my eyes, it symbolized hope returning to that corner of Cleveland. If anyone asks me why I would personally intervene when a manager crosses the line, I have a simple answer. I can't stand by and watch cruelty overshadow kindness. No quarterly profit is worth damaging someone's dignity. That's the vow I made when I opened the first Sunshine Brew, and that's the promise I'll carry until the day I pour my last cup.